The Russians, as you've pointed out, have been very reticent to facilitate escalation. Escalation has always been the strategy of Ukraine. Ukraine desires escalation because Ukraine desires to have NATO transition from being a supporting agency to being a active participant in the conflict, directly participating in the conflict. And Russia has been, hesitant to do anything that would feed that narrative. Um, I am not a a Russian politician. I don't get to make Russian political decisions, and I'm not a Russian military officer. I don't get to do their targeting for them. But if I played one on TV or stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, what I would say is this, that I believe Russia would continue to be um, hesitant to make that decisive step, that there would still need to be an intermediary step that would be limited to the territorial confines of Ukraine. Um, and you don't necessarily want to use all of your resources in that step. Russia has shown the West the Oreshnik one time. Um, it may be a weapon system that Russia goes back to, but it's a strategic weapon system. I mean, it's operated by the Strategic Rocket Forces. It is a nuclear capable system.
That line says it all. Escalation is Ukraine's strategy. They need NATO pulled in, not just helping. And the irony? The more restraint Russia shows, the harder Kiev pushes to drag the West deeper. It's a dangerous loop. One side avoids the trap, the other keeps setting it.
Um, and so I still think there might be some hesitancy on the part of Russia to employ this, unless they're going to make the decision to take Bankova, which is basically the Ukrainian governmental district of Ukraine, off the map, and then Oreshnik is your ideal. But I think the goal would be to punish the British, and I think what the Russians would do is use uh, weapon systems they've already employed. Maybe adding to the mix longer range Iskander S's, which have intermediate missile range on them. Zircon, and maybe a new variant of the KH-101 missile project 506 is now online. These are some weapons that could be used to annihilate the British presence in Ukraine. And this could be anywhere from taking out the British embassy, um, taking out known locations of British officers, advisory groups, um, any Ukrainian unit that's affiliated with the British, a massive decapitation strike of British capability in Ukraine that was designed to cause casualties. The Russians have been loath to carry out the kind of strikes that deliberately cause casualties amongst NATO members.
Ritter's warning Russia could use long-range, high-impact systems to wipe out British command and advisory posts in Ukraine, a deliberate decapitation strike. So far, Moscow has avoided strikes that kill NATO personnel. Crossing that line would be a major escalation. If that happens, the game changes from proxy war to direct confrontation, and nobody wants that.
I do think that the Russians are fed up with this escalation. I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump backed down from the Tomahawk isn't just the technical difficulties that he cited, that the Ukrainians would be unable to operate the Tomahawk on their own. This was known, and yet he appeared to be willing to, deploy American contractors to fill that gap. I think it was derived from the conversation he had with Vladimir Putin, which, in my opinion, probably mimicked some of the content of the conversation that Anatoly Antonov, when he was the ambassador of Russia to the United States, had with former American officials back in September 2024, which was then relayed to President Biden about the consequences of signing off on Keir Starmer's documents authorizing Storm Shadow, ATACMS, and Scalp to be used in long-range strikes. Nobody's ever publicly acknowledged what that conversation was, but my understanding is that it went something along the lines of that the Russian target deck would be extensive and that Washington, D.C. would be included in that target deck in terms of retaliation. dead serious.
Ritter's claim Trump pulled back on tomahawks after private warnings, possibly a Putin-Antonov message that U.S. cities, even Washington, were on Russia's target deck. That kind of back-channel threat is not bluster, it's escalation avoidance by intimidation. If it's true, it rewrites the red lines leaders pause when capitals are named, and wars suddenly become far riskier.
And I would imagine that Putin put President Trump on notice that if a tomahawk struck, for instance, the Kremlin, that Washington, D.C. would not be immune from retaliation, and that it's probably not in the best interest of the United States to go down that path. So Trump backed off from that. But now he's lost face. It's humiliating to be Donald Trump lately because the inconsistencies of his own policy position are manifest. The fact that he doesn't have any strongly held personal position, he's susceptible to, being manipulated, controlled by his inner circle of advisors, plays out before us and live on TV. Now he's, gone down the path of Scott Bessent's, sanctioning to bring down the Russian economy. I mean, Bessent has convinced Donald Trump that by sanctioning the big two, Rosneft and Lukoil, that the Russian economy will collapse. Vladimir Putin and other Russian leaders have said, we're pretty much immune to your strategy. And Trump doesn't seem to have a good response other than let's talk about it in 6 months. Sanctions aren't a policy. Sanctions are what happened when you have no policy. Sanctions are what you do when you don't know what to do. And the fact that Donald Trump now has pulled out the sanction card means he has no clue what to do with Ukraine.
Ritter paints a picture of Trump cornered, warned off military strikes, then grasping at sanctions to save face. But as he puts it, sanctions aren't strategy. They're a substitute for one. When leaders run out of ideas, they reach for punishment, and that's when diplomacy dies.
The European political and economic elite have invested so much political capital and economic capital into the model of supporting Ukraine, they're incapable of considering anything else. The moment they back away from Ukraine, it means Ukraine has lost. And if Ukraine loses strategically, then they lose strategically. And for a politician, that means you're out. You're probably going to be booted out of office, which is a death sentence for politicians. And for the economists, it means that you'll be held accountable for all of the, consequences, the dire economic consequences of your actions in supporting sanctions and things of this nature. So these are desperate people who have no other option than to continue to double down on stupid, which is what they're doing.
Ritter exposes Europe's trap. Leaders can't back down from Ukraine without admitting failure. For politicians, that means losing power. For economists, it means blame. So they double down not out of strategy, but out of fear, and that's when bad decisions become inevitable.
We need to make sure that we understand that European policy isn't coming from a place of intellectual strength, but actually coming from a place, an intellectual vacuum driven by the more base narcissistic, desires of politicians and economists who are looking out for their political gain and economic well-being, not for the collective well-being of Europe and European security. The other problem is that Donald Trump is dumber than dirt. And Marco Rubio is a horrible Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, melded into one. Rubio hates Russia, doesn't want peace with Russia, will do everything possible to undermine Russia. Donald Trump's just stupid. What Vladimir Putin appears to have said to Donald Trump, because I wasn't there, is that Russia will accept a ceasefire premised on Ukraine fully withdrawing from the Donbass and agreeing to withdraw from Kherson and Zaporizhia, but that a ceasefire could be arranged once they leave the Donbass. And then after that time, they will pull out of the other two territories. But Russia never once said, we're willing to give up or make territorial concessions. See, Trump is too stupid to understand the difference, because what Marco Rubio then told him is that we need to freeze the conflict here. Ukraine will keep Kherson and Zaporizhia in exchange for giving up the Donbass. That's not what Putin said. People need to read the Russian Constitution. They need to understand the limits of executive power in Russia. Vladimir Putin has unmatched power. There's no doubt about that. Been ruling for 25 years. But even Vladimir Putin can't give away Russian territory on his own volition. The Constitution prohibits it. He would have to go to the Duma. He'd have to get the support of that body, which would require the support of the Russian people. And right now, the Russian people will not support this. One of the reasons why Vladimir Putin has over 80% support is because he is a defender of the Russian nation. And if suddenly Vladimir Putin, who told these people, if you hold a referendum and you vote to come into Russia, we will bring you into Russia, you will be part of Russia, for Vladimir Putin to say, well, there's a caveat now. That would be the end of his credibility.
Ritter's point cuts deep. Europe's leaders act from ego, not intellect, and Washington's confusion only fuels the chaos. He says Putin's stance isn't flexible. Russia won't trade land. It now sees as its own. So any peace plan that ignores that reality isn't diplomacy, it's denial.